Welcome back, everyone. This is now the next panel in our day of 12 sessions. This is the session on ransomware, business email compromise, and emerging cybercrimes. And we've got a terrific set of people, so let's get started. Moderating this panel is Ffion Flockhart from Norton Rose Fulbright. Fee is a dispute resolution lawyer and qualified solicitor advocate with Norton Rose, where she serves as global co-head of cyber risk, which includes cyber insurance, and is a key aspect of ransomware response. Many times, Ffion becomes the most important person in IR because that kind of expertise becomes particularly important when you're figuring out how everyone's going to be reimbursed and if they can be reimbursed, especially during a ransomware where you're considering about the payment of the ransomware. I love the blog at Norton Rose, especially a recent summer post entitled Contact Tracing Apps, A New World for Data Privacy. Because on the one hand, we have stricter privacy regulations than ever before, but on the other hand, we now need to track and trace everyone's behavior. And it didn't surprise me that Norton Rose and Fee were sort of at the forefront of trying to figure out how to balance that. Fee is in Southwest Wales right now. Welcome, Fee.
Hey, thanks, John. Very much happy to be here.
Excellent. And next we've got Georgina Cohn, who advises on data, technology, artificial intelligence, and sourcing issues. She helps her clients prepare for and respond to cyber incidents and technology operational failures, including in relation to regulatory interactions, enforcement. She's at Linklaters, by the way, and supply chain impacts, claims, reputation, risk management, blackmail, extortion schemes, all of it. That's what Georgina Cohn. I love how she refers to herself as a business enabler. Too many lawyers create more problems than solutions, especially in our space of cyber, and they become cost centers. But not Georgina. Her approach is to help businesses and not mire them with convoluted privacy issues, but instead create solutions. Georgina's in London. Welcome, Georgina.
Hi, thank you.
Excellent. Next up is Bret, the Chief Executive Officer of the Crypsis Group. Bret has more than 25 years of experience in IR, including as a special agent in the U.S. Air Force of Special Investigations, as Chief of Research and Development in the Computer Crimes Unit for the U.S. Postal Service, their Inspector General, and as Director of Incident Response at Mandiant and digital forensics firm Strauss Friedberg. I've known Bret for many, many years and had the pleasure of working and learning from Bret on so many engagements. And what makes him so extraordinary is that Bret is one of the few CEOs who's also a technologist, and he's equally comfortable running his firm or digging into a complex malware reverse engineering engagement. It's an exciting time for Bret because Crypsis was just bought for $279 million, according to public documents, by Palo Alto Networks, and I think the deal closed last week. And it looks like, Bret, you went out and bought a few guitars to celebrate, or did you build one of those guitars?
That one, yeah.
I see.
Yeah, next time we're going to work on a sneaker connection, like a collection like yours. So.
Thanks, Bret. Bret, if you want to know what it's like to work with Steve Jobs or Bill Gates, then I suggest you spend some time working with Bret, if you ever wondered those things. He truly is a Renaissance man, and I'm so thrilled for all of his success at Crypsis, which, when we started this conference, was really only maybe 10 or 15 employees, and Bret was leading the charge. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
We have Liz Zale from Sard Verbinnen, who's a managing director in their office. And she advises public and private company executives, directors, and educational institutions on crisis management, reputation management, transformational mergers and acquisitions, shareholder activism, litigation support, and, of course, cyber. Crisis management is not just all about execution and remediation. It is also about communication. There are so many constituencies: your employees, your shareholders, the public, your board, your vendors, all of those people. There's so many communications issues, and that's why Liz is usually on board during these engagements, really from day one at ground zero. So we're so delighted to have Liz here. She's in New York. Welcome, Liz.
Thanks so much, John. Great to be here.
Excellent. Well, I think that covers everybody. I'm going to let you guys go, and good luck and have a great session.
Great. Thanks very much, John, for the introductions. That's fantastic. What I should say at the outset is that it'll be fantastic to make this session as interactive as we possibly can. So to the extent Anybody has questions, please throw them in the chat, and I will put those to the panelists. Obviously, a huge amount of experience here between Georgina, Liz, and Bret. So whatever hot topic you have on your lips, just throw it in there. We've been kind of chatting amongst ourselves about the recent trends that we've each seen in ransomware and BEC. I mean, taking ransomware first, I'm sure your experiences will be the same as mine. I mean, it's absolutely skyrocketed in terms of volume of incidents, or certainly incidents that are being detected earlier. And we're getting through at least one a day as a team, and they've tended to become a little bit trickier to deal with as well. And one of the things I was kind of thinking of asking you was, obviously with your number of years experience, how would you say these kinds of ransomware attacks in particular have evolved recently, and that they're quite different, certainly from our experience, to what they were even 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Maybe I'll pass that on to Bret, if that's okay.
Sure, I can share a few stats as well. I think as so far this year, we've worked 216 ransomware investigations as of this morning, and we get anywhere between, I think every week we've seen them this year. The lowest was 2. We only had 2 in a week, and the highest was 12. That happened a couple times. We had 12 in a week in March. I think it was sort of at the beginning of the lockdown, and then died down a little bit. But we did have a spike again in June, during a week in June, hit another 12. And lately it's been, I think this week we've had 2, last week we had 7, but it's been otherwise on a slight uptick, but that's about the pace. It's a little sporadic. A few of the threat actors kind of disappear for a while. Ryuk, for example, we hadn't seen for 4 to 5 months. I think we hadn't seen a Ryuk case at least at our firm, and we just got one in. It's a medical facility, which is interesting, and it's got some different twists to it. But I don't know if they were just on vacation or if they were also on lockdown or what it was. But so yeah, how it's evolved over the years, certainly, it definitely is being seen as a money-making sort of scheme. There have been times in the past where we've seen, reports of nation states using ransomware to maybe get past, sanctions or other things to raise funds, or other sort of things. But mostly it's been organized crime, and I think it's consistently been that through last year and this year, from our perspective. The newer thing is now sort of more and more people are sort of getting into the game, I think, which is causing the rise, where, I think from the organized crime perspective, they're realizing how profitable this can be, and they're figuring out how can they get in on it. And then the extortion, right? So that the threat to post data if they don't pay, or also sort of hitting them with ransomware and following that up with an additional extortion attack. I think we're seeing more and more. The ransoms are going up. We still see some lower ones in the 1 Bitcoin or under range, but we are seeing some of the larger ones in the $20 to $30 million range as well. I think the biggest one we've seen, I want to say it was last year, was they asked for 50 million. I think we ended up paying a bit less than that. But yeah, I think it certainly has become a profitable business, and it's being treated as such by the attackers. And so they're going about it very methodically and learning about their victims. Many times when we try to negotiate them down, they will quote information back to us about the fact that they know how much the company makes because they've looked at the financials and they know they can afford it. So very interesting stuff. Yeah,
definitely. That certainly resonates. How about you, Georgina? Does that resonate with the types of things that you're seeing as well?
Absolutely. I think we're seeing a lot more sophistication in people carrying out ransomware attacks, and particularly in relation to the extortion. there's a lot more sort of leverage that people want to use. So we've seen clients have sort of actors say to them, if you don't pay a ransom, we will effectively out you to a number of different global regulators. We will post something on social media. We will expose the data in very business destructive ways. We will start contacting your clients and the clients of your clients and effectively make this really problematic. We've also seen people sort of evolve to be a bit more canny about how they ask for ransoms, because there have been some movement in some jurisdictions to look at whether criminalizing the paying of the ransom obviously is a step that should be taken. And there have been different levels of forbearance, as you know. So instead of asking for ransom, some of them will say, well, actually, I found a flaw in your system and I'm just fixing it for you, and please pay me a bounty instead so that you can support the work of us do-gooders who are basically helping you protect your data. So we're seeing a lot more sophistication in the way both the attacks are carried out. They can be sort of more difficult to deal with, as you mentioned, and actually in the sophistication of the way that people are asking for ransoms themselves.
Yeah, definitely. We've actually just got a question in. I'd be interested in your views in this one. Given the current target-rich environment, do you have a sense of how threat actors are prioritizing targets to increase rate of return? I guess be interested to know what kind of industries you're seeing are being targeted most. We've certainly seen an increase in the financial institution sector and the transport sector as well, actually. But yeah, really interested to know whether you're seeing particular types of industry or company being targeted or prioritized by these threat actors.
What I can tell you is that we tend to see it all over the place. I think the last time we looked at the statistics by industry, we did see the two top ones were financial and healthcare. Mm-hmm. We're working with law enforcement on this Ryuk attack that just occurred at a medical facility, and it's consistent with what we're seeing, but we're also hearing from federal law enforcement that they're seeing an uptick in the healthcare industry being attacked, which is interesting, right? Because of the recent article about the I think reportedly an individual passed away because they couldn't get care because they were redirected to a hospital because the hospital they were headed to had experienced a ransomware attack and redirected him, which delayed the care. And so, it was sort of interesting to see at the beginning of the pandemic, there were some ransomware groups sort of saying that they would not do that, right? That they would not attack hospitals, or if they knew that they were impacting a medical facility, that they would, sort of go easy on them or something. So I don't know if we've really seen that at least play out any longer than maybe the initial month.
Yeah, that's true. And it ties into another question we've got through, actually. To what degree is the COVID-19 pandemic affecting the number of ransomware incidents? And are companies at more risk by having their employees working remotely, specifically from home during this time? We've certainly seen an uptick. I'm not entirely sure what the correlation is, but remote working has always been or remoting in has always been something that attackers target in terms of being able to access the systems either through Citrix, VPN, what have you. Have you seen an increase in that? I'll pass that to Georgina.
So, in terms of remote working, we do see a lot of worry about the remote working making it, for the reasons you just suggested, making everyone more vulnerable to ransomware attacks, and there has been some evidence that is the case. I would say, though, that a lot of the time when we're dealing with these kinds of attacks and vulnerabilities, they're not vulnerabilities created against that environment, they're vulnerabilities because of the way that certain things have been implemented or not really reviewed properly, etc. So I think still, from my perspective, the more common cause of this is sort of a lack of proper security implementation or a lack of understanding of how to do certain things, rather than necessarily just because of COVID. Having said that, on the contracting side, when we look at a lot of the sort of sourcing or tech deals we're doing, we do see lots of vendors being very, very worried about this and saying, look, if we are moving staff servicing you onto remote working, we will no longer take any responsibility whatsoever for any kind of cyber incident, and we won't say that we can guarantee any kind of security either, which we know the regulators are not comfortable with. So there's this real tension against the background of COVID about how you deal with that.
Yeah, definitely. How about you, Liz? Have you seen sort of different ways that you're having to deal with incidents from a PR point of view, given the sort of COVID being thrown into the mix?
Absolutely. I mean, just two examples. One is, there was an article this week about attempted attacks on the companies and educational institutions that are working on developing COVID-19 vaccines, and the educational institutions in particular being targeted, being perceived as more vulnerable, having, less investment in cybersecurity and perhaps, greater vulnerabilities. And I know specifically in the UK, there was guidance that was issued, I think just within the past a few weeks, around educational institutions, beyond COVID, but in this time of remote learning, that educational institutions have increasingly in the UK come under attack, and there were specific direction on reinforcing security protocols and vulnerability, potential vulnerabilities. So I think that that's a tremendous issue that we're facing. I would also say, I think just in general, the way that we're seeing, as Georgina had mentioned, ransomware evolve, is seeing that element of extortion. We're starting to see this whole other aspect of visibility, of using data as another wedge, whether it's to try to, force a target to pay, or just create tremendous reputation risk. And I'm reminded of, there was a recent example back in May of this year, a ransomware attack on a US-based law firm, Verbinnen, that was focused in the entertainment world. It has many A-list celebrity clients. And there was an initial ask of $21 million in ransom, which the firm very publicly refused to pay. The hackers then released stolen legal documents and emails relating to Lady Gaga, which got everyone's attention, who was one of Verbinnen's clients. They also claimed to have data related to President Trump, although he had never been a client of the firm. And then the attacker doubled their ransom request to $42 million, so just under Bret's threshold of 50 for the kind of highest request, and threatened to run auctions with celebrity client data, including Madonna and others. So I think, that kind of visibility is just generating all sorts of pressure on companies and sort of reputation risks beyond just a cyber incident, but the exposure of their intellectual property, their clients' data, their confidential business data. It creates so many more risks.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, from your point of view, Bret, I mean, when companies are looking at their InfoSec spend, for example, and bearing in mind the potential increased risk during COVID because there's such a load on the remote working system, the business interruption could be huge if that were taken down by ransomware or any other means. What would you say is the sort of the one key thing that companies should try and focus their dollar spend on from the point of view of trying to protect against this sort of issue?
That's a good question. I think it comes back to a common thing. I think there was a while where it used to be all about user education. There's only so much you can do there because you don't necessarily get a higher rate of return the more you educate people. You hit a limit. I think these days it is two-factor authentication, just looking at multi-factor authentication wherever you can. And if you can't afford it, find some place to take money from and put it into deploying two-factor. It just helps out with so many other things because there's other things that have to sort of go wrong, but the two-factor sometimes can save you from the impact of those other things going wrong.
Yeah, definitely. And from a legal point of view as well, that's one thing that the regulators are zeroing in on. They'll ask what the attack path is, and as soon as they see that, an attacker has managed to get through a door that's had single factor on it, then, they ask the question very quickly. It's not always easy to have a full MFA across your environment. And I think the other trend we're seeing with regulators is that they're now starting to expect multi-factor authentication sort of within applications in the system, not just the remoting in. And so, that's an additional burden. But yeah, I agree. Whatever MFA that you can roll out, if it's soft tokens or what have you, then that's
the other thing too. There's a lot of controversy around which kind you should use of multi-factor, and I would just start with any kind, right?
Yeah.
Just and then work from there.
Yeah. And what would you say is the easiest to deploy in terms of?
There's some that there's certainly a good school of thought that the same device shouldn't be used, right? Because if somebody gets control of that device, so if you're on your phone and you have an app and you need to do two-factor, and then you're getting a text message or you're getting an app notification, it's smart to probably move away from that, where you can have two separate systems or even more than two, right? With multi. Yeah. So, or even digital certificates. Although again, those are a little weaker. But I found that sometimes IT folks get a little caught up and we're looking for the right solution. And it could take a couple years to, find it, fund it, roll it out, and instead of just, well, let's do something now and then work on it.
Yeah, completely agree. Because what you'll tend to find in companies is that these IT projects, it takes a while to secure the funding. It then takes a while to roll out the projects. How does that interact with other systems and legacy systems, etc. But yeah, if you can even put the lowest threshold of MFA in, then that's a win right there. And certainly when you're explaining yourself to the regulator. We've got a bunch more questions. One of which I was actually going to raise myself earlier on. You mentioned, Georgina, that the attackers are getting more and more sophisticated in terms of what they're, the angle that they're taking, and being more specific about information to try and extract, to get more leverage and extract more money from victim organizations. But and we've certainly seen that. The other trend that we've seen, of course, is sort of the ransomware as a service, where the attackers aren't necessarily that sophisticated at all. Even if they wanted to, they probably couldn't figure out the way to properly give you the decryption keys and decrypt the data. We've certainly seen that. The question here is, do we see other cyber issues following a similar pattern in terms of, the attacker's evolving business model, if you like?
Wow, that's a pretty broad question. So, to be honest, we see every which way, every kind of business model. I think people you have your have-a-go heroes who are just trying to do it, and there are a lot of we come across a huge range of people implementing these attacks for different reasons, from your spotty teenager in the bedroom who just had too much time to, at one point we had someone decide to initiate an attack because they were really annoyed with the US government, and they thought that they would get back at one of our clients because they had a relationship with the US government. You have people who are doing it because they want sort of certain data that is very sensitive. And sort of as Bret said, I guess you see a wide spectrum of people. So from your state-sponsored attacks, which are incredibly difficult to deal with, and take us an enormous amount of time. Those things we know are problematic, but actually, surprisingly, one of the attacks that one of my clients had, which was done by someone who we wouldn't say was specifically very sophisticated, caused over 1.5 years worth of disruption to the business, simply because it was done in a way that involved lots of regulators, involved lots of their clients. It was, in that case, very, very difficult to restore the data. And even though there were backups, and even though there was some exfiltration side by side, but actually it was relatively limited because of the interest by the regulator and because of the interest by the clients. It was just something that kept spiraling and spiraling and spiraling, and there were lots of difficult questions around who ought to be liable, who ought to be involved. There were criminal processes running alongside civil processes, and because they were global organizations involved, it was, as you probably have seen a lot of times, Leon, just a hot mess of lots of different laws, lots of different regulations, lots of different regulators, and lots of different external actors. And one of the things that also was causing a lot of difficulty was just keeping on top of all of the different comms that were going in and out. So something more in Liz's sphere. So, people sort of almost giving rise to liability by just communicating in the wrong ways or setting rumors running. So if you like, the event itself shouldn't have been as much of an issue as it was, but because of the way that different people got involved in it, because that particular threat actor was very canny about involving different people, it created a lot more of a mess than it should have, given that that threat actor was relatively unsophisticated and actually hadn't asked for that big of a ransom.
Yeah, it is. It's like opening a can of worms for sure. I mean, quite often the ransom payment itself is not the biggest loss, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Although on that, we've got a question here saying, asking, are you saying companies pay ransoms? Very short answer to that is yes. A lot of companies do pay the ransoms. And the second part of the question is, how sure are you that they'll abide by their word? And on that, I mean, certainly, from my point of view, you have companies like Crypsis, who will, who might know the attackers. They might have quite a bit of experience with them. They'll look at the indicators of compromise and understand who they are, and they might have a track record of abiding by their word, a sort of a good bad guy in a way. And they almost have kind of TripAdvisor style ratings on the dark web as to what they whether they will abide by their word or not, whether they're good for it or not. And then you have on the other side of the equation the ransomware as a service people who possibly can't. They possibly don't have the technical expertise. So again, you'll have experts like Crypsis who will be able to say to you, you're very unlikely to be able to get back your data even if you pay the ransom here. So it's about getting those experts on board. And the third part of that question is, in terms of paying ransoms, who do you contact in the UK in the case of ransomware? In the US, you contact the FBI. In the UK, it's the NCA and the NCSC that we usually deal with here. But I mean, most companies will engage their forensic providers, their IR teams, like Bret's company, like Crypsis. We work a huge amount with Crypsis in order to do a cleanup and incident response to try and mitigate that to the extent possible. I'm going to take a slightly different, sort of extend that question a little bit in terms of paying ransoms to you, Liz, from a PR point of view. How does that play? And is it different in different jurisdictions? How are companies viewed if they pay a ransom?
It's a great question, and we see so many different approaches to this. Sometimes it's very much informed by the circumstances of the situation or the jurisdiction, the legal implications. But there's often a debate around also whether a company is going to feel whether they want to be forthright and transparent about making that payment or not. Do they want to reveal their business decisions again, particularly from a risk standpoint, but also let's say it's a company that's been in the middle of a series of layoffs or that has some challenges to its business, that can make it a much greater risk to have that sort of information out there that they, then were able to come up with 10 million or, X number of Bitcoin to kind of pay a ransom when all of these people over here have lost their jobs or et cetera. So I think, particularly in the time of the pandemic, there are many layers of this issue, and we see so many different examples of whether companies feel compelled to be more transparent and disclose it. It may be a materiality threshold for them, but also I think there's a lot of hesitation generally in not just talking about the amount and whether they pay or not, but whether it's a ransomware situation or not. And we have many very intensive discussions among the advisor group and with clients around sort of the ramifications of admitting that it's ransomware or not. Again, has a lot to do with the specifics of the situation. There's really no hard and fast rule. Other generally, one of the things that we would emphasize is don't tell some of your constituents that it was ransomware and assume that you cannot tell others. We've unfortunately, been in situations where we're trying to help companies sort of unravel, the issues that they created as a result.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure you're the same, but there's essentially a checklist of things that you should think about before paying a ransom. I mean, the top of the list is probably, is it legal in this particular situation? And what you want to make sure there is that the attacker, to the extent you possibly can, make sure that they're not a member of a terrorist group or on the OFAC sanctions list. And oftentimes, again, you get the experts in and they will be able to say to you, that's not really relevant here. The second question that I often get on this is, should we have a policy for dealing with ransomware? Or should we have a policy whether we should pay ransoms or not? I mean, I'd be interested in other people's views, but our own view is that no, don't have a policy as to whether you'll pay or won't pay, but have a document in place where you know which stakeholders need to sign off on it, and you know what considerations need to happen around that boardroom at that particular point in time. Otherwise, if you have a hard and fast rule, you'll find that you come unstuck quite often.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's exactly right. But I think what you do want to have is a value statement, because a lot of things come back to the values of the organization that you're dealing with. So in any crisis, whether it's relevant to, cyber or anything else, that company has to really understand what it stands for ethically and in so many other ways. And actually then, once you've understood that, dealing with a lot of elements of the crisis or any cyber or ransom attack becomes much easier, because you understand what your values dictate that you should do in any given circumstance.
That's a great point. And, a little bit of a side thing, but I just have to say, right, we help people. That's the business that we do. But we hate doing it, right? I mean, we do not like paying ransoms. We're very used to, we built the company around helping people, helping them with their cybersecurity problems. And usually they're attacked, we'll come in, help clean up, help them from happening again. This new thing about helping them pay is something that, hopefully stops soon. I think the real solution is in government though, right? And unfortunately right now, government is spending a lot of time going after the victims after they've been victimized. And I know what they're trying to do. They're trying to set an example so that others will take additional steps. But I still think, some people feel just helpless. They're being attacked sometimes, from another country, from unknown individuals, and I think that they need help.
Yeah, and I think there's a difference between companies taking individual data, for example, and monetizing that data deliberately, at the edges of privacy law or beyond privacy law, and somebody getting attacked. The victim organizations getting attacked, and obviously in Europe we have that standard under the GDPR of having appropriate technical and organizational measures, but where does that actually sit? Where do you draw the line? What does that mean in each particular industry when you come to the granular detail? It's really difficult. And the temptation by regulators, I think, is to start from the fact that we've had a breach and work back from there. And I think, ideally, the fact of a breach does not mean that you've breached the rules. It's just that it's a constantly evolving threat landscape, and it's difficult to keep up. The next question here is, what sort of risk calculus is used when deciding whether to pay a ransom as large as $50 million? I mean, that is huge, right? Especially for the Bitcoin market. It's probably distorts the market in Bitcoin. But yeah, any views on that?
Well, number one, right? Are you insured? That's probably in the calculus. And then, we have had instances where we haven't had to pay, right? And not a small amount either. There's been a handful of cases where we can help them recover. Either it's because they have a really good set of backups, or, to Georgina's point, they have values and they just saying, we're not paying. I don't care if we're down for a week. I don't care if we lose revenue for a week. We're going to spend the time to rebuild the systems and not pay. And they can survive that. Some companies can't survive that. Or they just, I lost my train of thought, but there are sometimes other instances where we don't have to pay, but usually, the business interruption is one of the biggest factors I think people look at when making that decision. It's less about rebuilding the systems from a cost perspective or anything like that, or the time that the consultants might help with that. It's more about how long am I down? Yeah,
and I find that varies by industry as well. So the business interruption is huge, and you may have sort of insurance that covers you for some of that at least. But I guess if you're a retail financial institution, for example, and they encrypt a whole bunch of personal data and people cannot access the system, they are then in hot water with the financial regulator as well as the data protection regulator if they don't get back up and running very quickly. So you can understand in those sorts of situations where you're potentially dealing with hundreds of thousands of data subjects who are trying to, use a bank machine or their accounts or what have you and can't, then it becomes really difficult. We've also found the financial regulators more and more interested in whether you're paying a ransom as well. I don't know if that's the same in the US, but certainly we found that in the UK. Just more questions coming through, which is great. So this is Ian Birdsey at Clyde's. Hi, Ian. Please can the panel share their views on the market trend of ever-increasing ransom demands and the propensity of attackers, such as with Maze, to provide a list of exfiltrated files?
I'm sorry, I missed the first part of that question, I think.
Yeah, just sharing our views on the market trend of the increasing ransom demands as we've been talking about, and the propensity of attackers to provide a list of exfiltrated files as with Maze.
Yeah, I definitely think we are seeing that more and more. We've seen a lot of Maze. I was taking a look again at NetWalker, Lockbit. Those have picked up in the last year, and also just the general sort of decentralization, where there were certain times where there was one or a couple actors that were mainly using these families of malware, and now they've fractured and use different methods of getting on systems. And again, I think that's just a matter of more people coming into sort of the career, I guess, of being a ransomware attacker. If I could ask the panel like a twist on that question, when you have that occur, how does that change, right? If you have ransomware, you're always thinking about exfiltration, you're thinking about having to notify, or at least having a conversation about the calculus of whether it's a notifiable event. But how does it change your conversations with your clients when there is this fear of exfiltration?
I mean, it changes the conversation a lot. I mean, most people will assume if there's a ransomware event and there's either personal data or very confidential or commercially secret or trade secret or IP in there, that they will assume that there is some kind of crisis going on, even if we didn't make it a crisis, if the backups were there and relatively easy to get out. I think there's an argument that even if that was personal data, it wouldn't be notifiable. And certainly in Europe, the Article 29 Working Party has said if all of those things were true, then you wouldn't necessarily have to notify us. But if we found out by some different way, we'd still want to test the adequacy of your security measures, which I thought was quite an interesting answer, because it's having your cake and eating it. But I think, as soon as we think that there is some exfiltration of data, that does change people's view of whether they are going to pay a ransom, whether they're going to notify not only regulators, but actually everybody who the issue may touch. And that may be a very significant web of people. And that's where, once you start notifying people, there are lots of things that start being very difficult to control. It can get more difficult to investigate the incident, for example. It can get more difficult to actually sort of remedy what's gone on and to find your way through things, because you are so involved in notifications, PR, responding to lots of different questions, particularly if it's a global incident. There's a question of actually, is that helpful or harmful to notify? And a lot of, I think, organizations now are very into the message of transparency. They get it. They understand that the public is more and more interested in ethical, accountable organizations, that they really want to see taking responsibility for things like this. And it does make a difference to share price. It does make a difference to whether you want to buy from a specific organization. They also know that the public are much more accepting that these kinds of things do happen. And so actually the important thing is not so much that it's happened, because actually everyone assumes that something like this is going to happen at some point. It's just, how do you respond? Have you been seen to respond effectively, right? And so one of the things that when you suspect exfiltration, that is always really important, is when we are asking sort of our forensic specialists, how much do we know about whether there has been exfiltration or not? How confident can we be? What do we think has actually been taken and what's not? But actually, where you see these snapshots being taken, it almost acts as proof of life, doesn't it? That this thing definitely has happened. There is the opportunity there. And so it does raise the stakes a lot and make people a lot more willing to take quite decisive action, if I can put it in that way, to address the event. And it does tend to help get the attention of senior management, for example, a lot more quickly. And where you see crisis plans that have, your platinum, gold, silver, bronze levels, it escalates that tier of response.
Yeah.
I would just add really quickly that that I think also, it ties into what you'd spoken about earlier, Georgina, as well, in terms of, the values of the company. We all think transparency is great, but if it's fundamental to the operations of the company, like a client that I worked with, they felt that even though they didn't have an exhaustive list or understanding of the data that potentially would have been exfiltrated, they needed to immediately go to their clients and let them know that there was activity on this front, and that they were going to stay close to them and keep them updated. And as a result, they had very little client concern or issues because they kept them so close and so informed. And so I think it's also really understanding, how do you leverage that to both be effective in your communications and be true to your business, but also take away some of the advantage of the attacker using that publicly against you.
That's a great point. And I think it kind of is almost, for some clients who do this really well, the event has almost led to an opportunity to have a better and closer relationship, because there's nothing that brings people together more than a crisis.
That's true. We'll see that Bruce has popped up, which means that we've got a very limited amount of time left. We haven't actually even touched business email compromise because
next conference.
Yeah, nice conference. Has been such a, I mean, and there's a huge more to say about ransomware. And in fact, we haven't been able to get through all the questions either. But I think anybody whose questions we haven't been able to get to, please feel free to email us, any one of us individually, and we'll give our thoughts. I don't know if we have an opportunity for a final thought from each of the panelists, Bruce, or are we out of time?
I'm afraid we're out of time.
No worries. No worries.
Thank you very much.
Terrific job, Fee, and to the panel. I think the number of questions is a direct response to how good this panel was. And if you do have questions, you can send them directly to any of the panelists. But thank you again. Our next panel is at 2:40 British Standard Time. It's EU incident response in the era of COVID-19 and work from home, which should be a really interesting panel. I hope you'll join us again in 10 minutes. Thank you.